Hello, my name is Niall McKay and welcome to Living with PSC, a podcast about the rare disease of primary sclerosing cholangitis. Now, PSC causes the bile ducts inside and outside the liver to become scarred, narrowed and eventually blocked, and leads to liver cirrhosis. In this podcast, we aim to dispel some of the myths about the disease.
My name is John Eaton. I'm a transplant hepatologist and gastroenterologist at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota.
Wonderful. And can you tell us a little bit about what we're doing here this weekend at the Mayo Clinic?
Yeah, so we're having a great time. This is really an exciting event for what I hope are the participants. Certainly for the people at Mayo Clinic, it's very exciting, and that's an annual PSC Partners meeting, which we're fortunate enough to be hosting here in Rochester. And so we have a number of great events and speakers lined up for this conference, and hundreds of patients with PSC and their family and support group have descended on Rochester, and we're hopeful it's going to be productive and informative for everybody.
Since PSC is such a serious disease, let's start with the good news, if you like. I mean, there is reason to believe that there's some good news for PSC patients, isn't that correct?
Absolutely. I think I'm more optimistic now than I've ever been about the future prospects of caring for patients with PSC. And I think if you talk to people who've been involved in the study and care of patients with PSC for longer than me, over 40 years, I think this is we're entering into a renaissance or a golden age. And I think I say that partly because the amount of funding, the amount of research, the amount of interest in developing an effective medical therapy from our partners in industry is growing rapidly, more so than ever before. So those are some of the reasons why we're optimistic and hopeful.
Great, and that's the general. Could we maybe drill down and get a little more specific in terms of, say, some of the treatments that are kind of coming down the pike that will make the disease more manageable?
Yeah, so at this point, either right now or soon, there's going to be a number of phase 3 clinical trials, which will be enrolling patients with PSC, which if you go back 10 to 15 years ago, that would almost be unheard of. And those are being conducted across centers in North America and in Europe. And those are including things such as nor-ursodeoxycholic acid, an agent that is being a trial that's being conducted by Gilead, Celecoxib, which is related to obeticholic acid. That is going to be a phase 3 study with some promising earlier clinical trial data, and that study will be conducted in North America. There will be a study examining vancomycin as well in North America, and other smaller phase 2 studies being conducted across the United States. And so now, to some degree, we're almost having a problem where we have too many clinical trials and almost too few patients who could participate, but it's a good problem to have.
And in terms of, say, nor-urso, what does that do that hasn't been done before by, say, urso?
Wonderful question. So in a way, it's a cousin to urso, if you will. And so it acts probably as a choleuretic. So what do I mean by that? It means it enhances bile flow through the liver and the bile ducts more robustly than urso. It may potentially also protect the bile ducts from damage by enhancing what's called a bicarbonate umbrella around those cholangiocytes, or the lining of the bile ducts. And there's probably multiple other mechanisms in which it may have an impact on PSC. What we know is it seems as though it's been well tolerated among patients with PSC, and has been shown to at least improve some markers of what we call cholestasis, which is effectively backup of bile. And chiefly, it improves alkaline phosphatase, which is one PSC-related disease marker. Whether or not that's going to translate into making patients feel better or making patients live better or live longer, I think remains to be seen, but certainly warrants ongoing study and investigation.
And we'll go to some of the others now in a minute, but just drilling down on urso a little bit, because urso, if you like, it's a bad rap, doesn't it, sometimes, in terms of that, there's, I think there was a study maybe a decade ago where it didn't improve things.
High dose urso. And I think out of every medicine or compound that's been studied in PSC, I think urso is the most common. And despite having a number of clinical trials which examine urso and PSC, there's never been one that is convincingly said that it really alters the disease course. It may improve liver tests in some people. And the study that you were referencing looked at a higher dose of urso than what had been used previously, and that was at about 25 to 30 milligrams per kilogram per day. And in that particular study, patients who received that high-dose urso were more likely to have adverse events compared to those who received the placebo or the sugar pill.
But they were also very sick, weren't they? Quite advanced.
Yeah, I think there were a number of patients who were advanced, but those adverse outcomes occurred, almost irrespective of how advanced they were at the study entry.
So high-dose urso is not a good idea,
I think high-dose urso is not a good idea. Now, whether more moderate doses of urso have any room in the care of patients with PSC, I think reasonable people may disagree and debate how they approach that. But if it does have a significant clinical impact, it doesn't seem to have a very large clinical impact that we've been able to bear out with clinical trials.
No pun intended.
No pun intended.
With bear, yeah.
Right.
Because it was originally discovered as bear bile.
Yeah, this goes to show you that unique observations can really have a lot of meaning in science and medicine. And so the story of urso is an interesting one in that it's a traditional herbal remedy in Chinese medicine that they collected from bears through their bile, and that had been used for hundreds and hundreds of years in China. And in the 60s and 70s, people began investigating it to dissolve gallstones. And then there were some observations that it may improve liver tests in people with a condition called primary biliary cholangitis. That observation in just a few patients, which was very coincidental, led to the surge in research of urso and PBC, and then ultimately PSC as well.
And specifically what it does, it kind of thins the bile so that it gets through the restricted bile ducts, or is that an oversimplification?
No, I think that's a really good way to think about it. It may make the bile less sticky is one way of thinking about it. It does change the composition of the bile. It probably works in several different ways by altering the bile flow and the bile composition.
And has it been shown to reduce inflammation at all, or is that?
It may reduce inflammation underneath the microscope in some conditions like PBC. In PSC, while there was some earlier studies which suggested there might be some positive benefits to it underneath the microscope, that's never really borne out very much.
And you mentioned some other trials there. You mentioned other trials that are going on in the U.S. at the moment.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of phase 3 trials, these are larger trials involving hundreds of patients, and will involve a treatment group and then a placebo group. And another trial that's going to be up and running very soon is a study that's looking at vancomycin. Vancomycin is an oral antibiotic that is approved to treat a serious infection in the colon called C. difficile. C. difficile is a bacterial infection that is fairly common and prevalent among those patients with inflammatory bowel disease. And it's one of the treatments of choice for that condition. But over the years, observations have occurred, and people have found that vancomycin may improve liver tests anecdotally in children and adults with PSC. There's been some limited research in that area, mainly with just observational studies or studies with a relatively few number of patients that were given vancomycin, and their liver tests may have improved by 30%, for example, over the years. But I think there's enough interest in the drug and enough signal for potential benefit where we really need to look at this in a very robust and controlled way so we can make some conclusions about whether or not it may be helpful. And so that's the rationale for conducting this study. So it's going to be a trial that's going to be at 3 different sites. Mayo Clinic, Arizona, Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, Mayo Clinic in Florida in Jacksonville. And patients will receive either the drug or a placebo. And really we're going to be looking for changes in blood tests to see is there some potential signal that it may be beneficial.
So you'd be looking at the alkaline phosphatase and the bilirubin
yes.
As markers. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because certainly, the news groups, whether it's on Facebook or whatever, are kind of all alight with vancomycin at the moment, and it's hard to. Then when I went to look to see if there was any actual medical studies, they're very hard to find, if any.
Agree. There's a real disconnect between the amount of evidence that's out there that it may be helpful and the enthusiasm. I think having the enthusiasm is good, and I think that's why we really just need to study it in a rigorous way, so that way we'll know more about is it safe and is it potentially effective.
And there are some other interesting things happening. I'm not sure how much you can talk to us about, but I know I was chatting to one anonymous donor here who was talking about building up a proper database of stool, blood, and urine and that's something that Mayo is very involved in as well. Yeah,
another good question. I think one of the key strategies to further our understanding of PSC, which is a rare disease. In the United States, maybe 30 or 40,000 people have it, so it's not common. But in order to improve our understanding and get closer to developing effective treatments, we need to be more organized in how we gather data. We need to gather large amounts of data from large amounts of patients, and that is not just simple age, data PSC diagnosis, IBD yes or no, which is what's been done historically. We need more detailed, what we call phenotypic data, or data about the disease process, how it affects people, and also biospecimens as well. And biospecimens could be stool, blood, or bile, or stem cells from the skin, etc. And so that approach, or that big data approach, will enable us to study PSC on levels like never before, looking at it from multiple perspectives and taking what's called a multi-omic approach. And so we're excited to be involved in that process.
And talking about stool, there's sort of an increasing amount of evidence to say that PSC might be something to do with the microbiome. We're not quite sure what. Is that correct?
Yeah. There's interesting animal data, and even in humans, that there are differences in the microbial diversity, or the types of microbes that are that occupy the intestine and colon patients with PSC compared to those who don't have PSC. I think the larger question is, well, what does that mean? How do we interpret those results? Is that something that we could potentially manipulate to help with the disease process? I think these are all good questions which are being investigated. And that's one of the reasons why there's been some of that interest in vancomycin, because as an antibiotic, it will alter the flora or the microbial communities or the microbiome that is naturally within us. Whether or not that's going to translate into better outcomes in patients with PSC, we don't know. It remains to be seen.
Is there like a chicken and egg situation? Maybe the PSC's affecting the microbiome, or maybe the microbiome is affecting the PSC? Do we know?
Yes and yes. I mean, we simply just don't know, and that's really one of the challenges in microbiome-related research. Does that microbiome, is it different in somebody with a particular condition because they have that condition, which in turn affects the bacteria and other microorganisms that live within that community? Or conversely, was there some change in that microbial community that triggered a series of events that led to the disease state? So is it just simply an association, or is it causality? And we don't know.
I think I saw a study that was in Japan and maybe Norway as well about introducing certain types of microbial into mice and it actually creating PSC. Is that?
Yeah, in some germ-free mouse models, which normally don't have PSC. There's been some study in that and the link between the microbial communities there, or lack thereof, and developing PSC-like features in mice.
Oh wow! Yeah. So it is. It's an interesting time.
Yeah, it is.
We believe that the disease is primarily in middle-aged white men. I suppose. Is that because they're better at detecting it, or is it?
I think that's a really good question. And I think we are beginning to recognize PSC in more diverse communities and patient populations. I think PSC is more increasingly being recognized in women more so than in prior years. And so while it's true that in general PSC may be more common in middle-aged Caucasian males, I think that that difference is decreasing as our understanding of the disease improves.
So what we're hoping for, I guess, is, I mean, you're one of your things is as a transplant doctor, as a liver transplant doctor, but in a way you seem to be sort of working to make yourself unemployed.
Absolutely. That's the whole idea. Is liver transplant, while effective, life-saving, and life-changing, generally it's a last resort option because it's definitely not a risk-free option. There's a lot of potential risk which comes with transplant itself and the medications that are needed after transplant. And so while it is an excellent option for select patients, we'd like to avoid that whole process. Because
it's expensive and
it's risky. And so, for example, if we could develop a medical therapy with a good side effect profile that prevents that disease progression and makes people feel better along the way, that would be ideal.
Yeah, because there's a lot of things there's a lot of discomfort with PSC, isn't there? There's itching.
And I think that's an important point that we probably don't talk about enough, and that's really the quality of life. And I think as doctors and providers that are studying and doing research in PSC, we're certainly looking at things to decrease liver failure-related problems or decrease the need for transplant. But it also really important is to try to make people's quality of life better along that whole process. And so I think that's an emerging area of research that we are and will be seeing more and more of. And that is how do we measure what people are experiencing with PSC? So how can we assess the quality of life in somebody with PSC? So that way we could study it better and then maybe find ways that we could improve it. And I think that's a hot topic, and I think we're going to be seeing more and more of that in the coming years.
Great. Is there anything that you'd like to add that I didn't ask you, or is there?
No, I think, in addition to some of the areas that are moving, I think another aspect of research that I believe we're going to be seeing more and more of is integration of artificial intelligence and machine learning and a variety of aspects of research, whether it's PSC related or not. And I think it's a powerful tool that more and more people are going to be employing either to predict outcomes in PSC, doing advanced genomics or metabolomic study or multi-omic studies. But artificial intelligence is a way, and essentially partnering with the computer, if you will, to try and solve problems. And it's a powerful tool that we have not taken full advantage of in medicine, and we're just now starting to see the beginnings of that with many projects that are underway using AI-based methodologies. So I'm excited about that core group.
Wonderful. And despite the fact that you're trying to make yourself redundant in terms of the transplants, transplant is still probably the best option or the best treatment for a very advanced stage illness of PSC. Isn't that correct?
True. But I would say that not everybody with PSC is ultimately going to need a transplant. I think that's an important point to remember. But transplant is an effective option for those patients with PSC whose quality of life is impaired because of the PSC that can't be impacted with less invasive means, or PSC is presenting a problem where it may limit life expectancy. Transplant is an option that has good long-term results.
And what are the advantages and disadvantages of becoming a transplant, a donor? I beg your pardon.
So from a living donor perspective?
Yeah, or from a, yeah.
So from a living donor perspective, patients or people are interested in being a living donor. Living donor liver transplantations are conducted at select centers across North America. And so it would involve first having some kind of an evaluation to see if that person would be a suitable donor. Not everybody who wants to be a donor for a particular person is ultimately going to be a suitable candidate for a variety of reasons. So that the first step is making a call and having a discussion with somebody. There may be significant benefits to the recipient. There's probably no benefits to that person donating aside from they are helping out another fellow human being. But that comes with some risks, and some of those risks are significant, and they need to be very well thought out and very carefully thought out. But it can be life-saving and can be very impactful for patients.
Is there particular blood groups that are better at donating than others, or does that?
Well, I think the better the blood group is one that's going to be compatible for the specific recipient. So, yeah. So
family members are typically are often the people who donate to other families.
Oh, yeah. So yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So certainly, if you're, a blood group O, for example, then that would be, more universally acceptable.
And then in terms of becoming a donor, there's no real disadvantages of becoming a donor after you die, is there?
No, not at all. And I signed up to be an organ donor, and I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about being an organ donor. Often they are not founded in truth. And so I think people should maybe educate themselves about what that means by looking online and going to some reputable websites about organ donation, and making a decision for themselves if they want to sign up with the state when they register driver's license, et cetera, if they want to be a donor, and if that works for them, I think they should do it.
Wonderful. Well, you've been so helpful, so thank you very much, Dr. Eaton, for talking to us and for hosting us here this weekend.
Yeah. Thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure, and I got to say it's so invigorating to interact with this group. It definitely makes me more motivated to work harder for patients with PSC. So thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this week. For more information about PSC and for a list of people and topics we'll be covering in the near future, please go to www.pscpartners.org. That's www.pscpartners.org. PSC Partners is a non-profit organisation dedicated to providing education and support to primary sclerosing cholangitis patients. There is information and resources on the website. There is a conference once a year. There is a private Facebook group that you can also join. Also, please join our patient registry. This is an anonymous database that provides research support to the medical community who are researching this disease. Thank you very much for listening.